A message arrived without warning, cutting through every communication channel Earth possessed. Haiyan Wu stood in his office aboard the Terran diplomatic station, watching the holographic seal of the Galactic Council rotate slowly in the air before him. He had been Earth's ambassador to the outer colonies for 3 years, but he had never received a direct summons from the Council itself. "Play it," he said quietly. The seal dissolved into the image of a tall, angular creature with silver skin and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern. The Crethian magistrate, speaker for the Council's Enforcement Division. Its voice came through in perfect English, translated by technology humanity still barely understood. "The Terran species is hereby summoned to appear before the Galactic Council within 10 standard cycles. You stand accused of unauthorized territorial expansion into protected space. Failure to appear will result in immediate sanctions and potential military intervention. This summons is not a request." The message ended. Haiyan Wu stood in silence for a long moment and pressed the button to connect him with Earth's government. President Taeyang answered within seconds, her face tight with concern. "You saw it too?" she asked. "Everyone saw it," Haiyan Wu replied. "They broadcast it across all frequencies. They wanted to make sure we understood this was serious. What do they mean by unauthorized expansion? We filed colonization claims for every world we settled. Filed with our own records, yes, but apparently not with theirs." Haiyan Wu pulled up a star map, highlighting 12 colony worlds in red. "These are the ones they're talking about. All in the outer rim. All settled in the last 15 years. Total population across all 12 is about 43 million people." Taeyang's expression hardened. "Those are our people. Our homes." "I know, but the Council seems to think otherwise." Haiyan Wu zoomed in on the territorial markers. According to their message, these sectors were designated as restricted zones about 4,000 years ago, long before humanity even left Earth. 4,000 years? They expect us to honor agreements made before we even knew aliens existed. Apparently so. Haiyan Wu paused. "I need to go there. We need to hear what they have to say. And if they demand we abandon those worlds?" Haiyan Wu met her eyes through the hologram. "Then we'll deal with that when it comes. But we need to at least listen. Send me with a small team. They Haiyan for military perspective, and G1 for the science angle. We'll take the Resolute Dawn and make the journey." The president nodded slowly. "Go. But Haiyan Wu, remember something. Those 43 million people trusted us to protect them. Don't come back having signed away their homes." "I won't," he promised. 3 days later, the Resolute Dawn departed from Earth's orbital station. The ship was small for an interstellar vessel, built for speed and diplomacy rather than combat. Haiyan spent most of the journey reviewing military reports, while G1 buried herself in xenobiological research. Trying to understand the species they would soon face, Doc Haiyan Wu stood on the observation deck, watching stars streak past as the ship jumped through quantum space. The journey to the Council Station would take 2 weeks, even at maximum speed. He used the time to study everything humanity knew about the Galactic Council. It was not much. First contact had happened only 30 years ago, when a Peltharian scout ship discovered Earth's early colony on Mars. The Peltharians had been friendly enough, sharing basic technology and warning humanity about the greater galaxy beyond. But they had also been clear. The galaxy was old, and it was ruled by those who had been traveling the stars for millennia. The Council itself was ancient, supposedly founded over 10,000 years ago, when the first spacefaring species met and decided they needed a way to prevent constant warfare. Over time, it had grown to include hundreds of member species, each with varying degrees of power and influence. Humanity had been granted observer status, allowed to listen but not vote, permitted to exist but not yet considered truly equal. Haiyan Wu had attended 3 council sessions in the past, each time feeling like a child sitting at a table of adults who barely acknowledged his presence. This time would be different. This time, they were not asking humanity to observe. They were demanding humanity answer for its actions. A resolute dawn emerged from quantum space at the edge of the council sector. Before them hung a structure that defied easy description. The council station was built from materials that seemed to shift between solid and liquid, held together by gravity fields that humanity's scientists still could not fully explain. It was enormous, larger than Earth's moon, and it floated in the void between 3 stars that had been artificially arranged in a perfect triangle. "That's impossible," Dai Haiyan muttered, staring at the view screen. "Most of what they can do is impossible by our standards," G1 replied. "We're infants compared to some of these species. The Krethians have been spacefaring for 12,000 years. The Valthorians even longer. Then why do they care about a few human colonies?" Dai Haiyan asked. "We're nothing to them." "That's what worries me," Haiyan Wu said quietly. "They don't do things without reason." The ship docked at one of the station's many ports, and the 3 humans were met by a Peltharian escort. The creature was small, barely reaching Haiyan Wu's chest, with soft blue fur and large, gentle eyes. It spoke in halting English. "Welcome, Ambassador Haiyan Wu. The council awaits. Please follow." They walked through corridors that seemed to stretch impossibly far. Past chambers where beings of every imaginable shape conducted business in languages that sounded like music, static, and earthquakes all at once. Finally, they reached the grand chamber where the council convened. The room was vast, with seats arranged in concentric circles rising up into darkness. Hundreds of species were represented, each delegation watching as the humans entered. At the center, on a raised platform, sat the Krethian magistrate and 2 other beings Haiyan Wu recognized from his studies. A Valthorian commander, its crystalline body refracting light into rainbow patterns, and something that looked like a living shadow, but spoke with a voice like grinding stone. "The Terran delegation will approach," the magistrate commanded. Haiyan Wu walked forward, Dai Haiyan and G1 flanking him. He stopped at the marker, indicating where petitioners were meant to stand, and looked up at the council. "Humanity acknowledges the summons," he said clearly. "We are here to listen." "You are here to answer," the magistrate corrected. "Your species has violated the Keshan Accords, ancient law that prohibits settlement in protected zones. 12 of your colonies exist in clear violation of these accords. This council demands immediate withdrawal and reparations for the violation." "With respect," Haiyan Wu replied carefully, "humanity was never informed of these accords. We were never consulted. We were never invited to participate in their creation. Ignorance is not a defense. The accords predate your species' spaceflight. That you did not know of them does not excuse their violation." Haiyan Wu felt anger rising but kept his voice level. "You're saying that laws made thousands of years before we even knew you existed are binding on us? That we're expected to follow rules we had no part in making?" "That is exactly what we are saying," the Valthorian commander spoke, its voice like crystal bells. "The galaxy operates under established law. New species do not get to ignore these laws simply because they are new." "Then explain this to me," Haiyan Wu said. "If these zones were so important, so protected, why were there no markers? No warnings? No indication whatsoever that we were violating anything?" "The lack of markers does not indicate permission," the shadow being rumbled. "It indicates that the law is so fundamental, so ancient, that marking it would be redundant." The magistrate raised one long hand. "Enough debate. Humanity has 72 hours to begin withdrawal procedures. You will submit a plan for reparations totaling 400 trillion credits. These terms are final. They require only your acceptance. Haiyan Wu stared up at the council, feeling the weight of 43 million lives pressing down on him. Around the chamber, hundreds of alien eyes watched to see what the human would do. This was a test, he realized, not just of humanity, but of whether they would accept their place in the galaxy's hierarchy. "I need to consult with my government," he said finally. "You have 72 hours, the magistrate repeated. "Use them wisely." The session ended, and Haiyan Wu walked out of the chamber with his mind racing. Behind him, he could hear the murmur of hundreds of species discussing what they had just witnessed. Some sounded amused. Others sounded bored. None sounded like they expected anything other than complete human compliance. Back aboard the Resolute Dawn, Haiyan Wu opened a quantum channel to Earth. President Taeyang's face appeared, along with Fleet Admiral Su Bin and a dozen other officials. "They want us to abandon the colonies," Haiyan Wu said without preamble. "All 12 of them. And they want us to pay for the privilege of having settled there in the first place." "That's insane," Su Bin said immediately. "We can't just evacuate 43 million people." "They don't care," Haiyan Wu replied. "To them, we're newcomers who need to learn our place." Taeyang was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question that would change everything. "What happens if we say no?" The question hung in the air of the Resolute Dawn's command center. Through the quantum link, Earth's leadership stared back at Haiyan Wu, waiting for an answer that could reshape humanity's future in the galaxy. "War," Daeyon said bluntly. "If we refuse, they'll see it as rebellion. They have thousands of ships. We have barely over 1,000. They also have politics," Ji-Wan countered, her fingers moving across her datapad. "I've been studying the Council's history. They're not as unified as they appear. Give me a moment." She transferred data to the main screen, and everyone could see what she had discovered. A timeline appeared, showing 23 different species over the past 2,000 years, each one flagged with red markers. "What am I looking at?" President Taeyang asked. "Compliance cases," G1 explained. "Species that were forced to accept Council authority through legal manipulation. The Council creates laws, backdates them, or applies ancient agreements to new species, and forces compliance through threats. It's happened 23 times that we know of." "And did those species comply?" Admiral Su Bin asked. "All of them." G1's expression was grim. Every single one chose to submit rather than fight. Most are now what the Council calls junior members. They have seats, but no real power. They pay tribute, follow rules they never agreed to, and essentially exist as subordinate states. "That's what they want from us," Haiyan Wu said quietly. "They want us to fall in line, to accept that being newer means being lesser." Taeyang leaned back in her chair, thinking. Around her, the other officials began arguing among themselves. Some advocated for compromise, others for defiance. The debate grew heated until the president raised her hand for silence. "Haiyan Wu," she said, "you're there. You've seen them. What do you think we should do?" He took a deep breath. "I think we need to understand what we're really deciding here. This isn't just about 12 colonies. It's about whether humanity will be a free species or a subordinate one. If we comply now, we set a precedent. We tell the galaxy that humans can be pushed around, that we'll abandon our own people if threatened. But if we refuse," one of the officials interjected, "we're risking war with civilizations that have been fighting in space since before we invented the wheel." "Maybe," Haiyan Wu acknowledged. "But consider this. They gave us 72 hours. Not 72 minutes, not an immediate ultimatum. Hours. Why? Because they expect us to be afraid. They expect us to calculate the odds and choose submission." "You think they're bluffing?" Su Bin asked. "I think they're used to winning without fighting," Haiyan Wu replied. Every species they've done this to folded. Why waste ships and resources when fear does the work for you? Taeyang nodded slowly. G1, you said the council isn't unified. Explain. The council has hundreds of members, but only about 30 have real power, G1 said, pulling up more data. The Krethians and Valthorians are the strongest military powers. They're also the most invested in maintaining the current hierarchy. But there are dozens of smaller species who resent their dominance. Some abstained from the vote to summon us. That's almost unheard of. Who abstained? The president asked. The Paltharians, for one. They were the first to make contact with us, and they've always been sympathetic. The Nomian Assembly also abstained, as did the Kresh Commonwealth. None of them voted against the summons, but they didn't support it either. Interesting, Taeyang mused. So there are cracks in the foundation. Small ones, G1 cautioned. But yes, if we refuse, we won't be completely alone. We just can't count on open support from anyone yet. The president looked at each face on the screen, then at Haiyan Wu directly. If we refuse, can you deliver the message in a way that doesn't make war inevitable? I can try, Haiyan Wu said. But Madam President, I need to know. Are we actually refusing? Because once I say those words, there's no taking them back. Taeyang was silent for a long moment. Then she straightened in her chair, and her voice became steel. Those 43 million people chose to leave Earth and build new lives. They trusted us to support them. They're farmers, teachers, engineers, families. They're not bargaining chips, and they're not subjects to be traded away because some ancient aliens say we don't have a right to exist where we are. She paused and continued with quiet intensity. Humanity didn't crawl out of caves, survive wars and plagues and disasters, reach for the stars, and finally find our place among them just to be told we need permission to exist. So yes, Ambassador Haiyan Wu, we refuse. Tell them we refuse. Around her, the other officials nodded in agreement. Even those who had argued for compromise seemed to feel the weight of the decision and accept it. Admiral Su Bin spoke up. I'll start preparing the fleet. If they come for us, we'll make them regret it. Make it defensive, Taeyang ordered. I want every colony protected, but we don't fire first. They need to be the aggressors if this turns into shooting. Understood, Su Bin replied. The meeting ended, and Haiyan Wu found himself alone with his thoughts. Haiyan approached, standing beside him at the viewport. You know, this is probably going to go badly, the military advisor said. No, we might lose everything. We might, but you still think it's the right choice? Haiyan Wu turned to look at his friend. Do you remember why you joined the military, Haiyan? To protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Exactly. And right now, 43 million people need protection. Not from monsters or invaders, but from a system that thinks it owns them simply because it's older. Haiyan Wu smiled sadly. Besides, someone once told me that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. That someone sounds wise. It was my grandmother. She lived through the last war on Earth, before unification. She saw what happens when people accept tyranny, because fighting seems too hard. He looked back out at the stars. She'd tell me to stand up. So that's what we're going to do. The 72 hours passed slowly. Haiyan Wu spent the time preparing his statement, writing and rewriting it dozens of times. It needed to be clear, firm, but not needlessly aggressive. He needed to close the door on compliance while leaving room for actual negotiation. When the time came, he stood alone before the council chamber doors. Haiyan and G1 had offered to accompany him, but this was something he needed to do alone. The doors opened, and he walked into the vast room filled with hundreds of alien species, all watching him with varying degrees of interest. The Crethian magistrate sat at the center, its 4 eyes fixed on Haiyan Wu as he approached the speaker's position. "Ambassador Haiyan Wu," the magistrate said, "humanity's time has expired. Present your acceptance of the council's terms." Haiyan Wu took a breath and began to speak. His voice was calm, but it carried clearly through the enormous chamber. "I stand before this council not to present acceptance, but to present humanity's response to your demands. After careful consideration with our government, our people, and our conscience, humanity's answer is no." The chamber erupted. Hundreds of voices in dozens of languages created a cacophony of sound. The magistrate raised its hands for silence, but the noise continued for nearly a minute before order was restored. "You refuse?" The Valtharian commander said, its crystalline voice sharp with disbelief. "Do you understand what you are saying?" "I understand perfectly," Haiyan Wu replied. "Humanity recognizes no authority we did not consent to. We agreed to join the galactic community as observers. We agreed to follow laws we participated in creating. We never agreed to abandon our people because of agreements made millennia before we even left our planet." "This is outrageous," the magistrate said, its voice rising. "The law is the law, regardless of your ignorance or arrogance." "No," Haiyan Wu said firmly. "The law, true law, requires the consent of those governed. What you're describing isn't law. It's tyranny dressed in legal language. You're demanding compliance without representation, punishment without participation, submission without respect." The shadow being spoke, its voice like an earthquake. "You dare call this council tyrannical? We have maintained peace for 10,000 years. Have you?" Haiyan Wu asked. "Or have you simply maintained control? I've read the histories. 23 species forced into compliance over the past 2,000 years. How many wars were prevented by crushing them before they could even defend their rights?" "You speak of things you do not understand," the magistrate said coldly. "Young species always believe they know better than their elders. You will learn humility, or you will learn pain." "Perhaps," Haiyan Wu acknowledged, "but we'll learn it as free beings making our own choices, not as subjects following orders we never agreed to. Our colonies remain. Our people stay in their homes, and the reparations you demand will not be paid." "Then you choose war," the Valtharian said. "No, we choose freedom. If you choose war because we won't submit, that's on you." Haiyan Wu looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many delegates as he could. Humanity came to the stars, hoping to find fellowship among the civilizations of the galaxy. What we found instead was a hierarchy that demands we know our place. Well, we know our place. It's standing on our own feet, governing our own people, and living by principles we can be proud of. He turned back to the magistrate. "If this council wishes to discuss genuine negotiation, as equals, we're willing to listen. But if you come to us with demands and threats, you'll find that humanity learned long ago how to stand against those who would conquer us. You would fight the entire council?" The magistrate asked, disbelief and anger mixing in its voice. "If necessary," Haiyan Wu said simply. "But I don't think it will come to that. Because I think there are species in this chamber who are tired of being told how things have always been done. Species who might like to see someone finally say no." He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect without submission. "Thank you for hearing me. When you're ready to talk as equals, you know where to find us." Then Haiyan Wu turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a council in chaos for the first time in living memory. The Resolute Dawn left the council station at maximum speed, and within an hour, the first reports began flooding in. The Crethian Dominion had declared humanity a rogue species and was mobilizing its fleet. The Valtharian Empire announced immediate economic sanctions and began assembling its own warships. 15 other council species pledged support within the first day. Hyun-woo sat in his quarters, watching the intelligence reports scroll across his screen. 8,000 ships. That was the current count of vessels being gathered to enforce the council's will. 8,000 against humanity's 1,200. The mathematics were brutal. Dae-hyun entered without knocking, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Hyun-woo and sat down heavily. "Well, we certainly got their attention," he said dryly. "Did you expect anything less?" "No, but seeing it in real numbers is different than imagining it." Dae-hyun pulled up his own data pad. "The good news is they're not moving fast. The Krethians won't be ready to deploy for at least 2 weeks. The Valthorians are faster, but they're organizing a blockade rather than an assault force." "They still think we'll back down," Hyun-woo said. "They're making a show of force to scare us into compliance." "Will it work?" Hyun-woo smiled grimly. "Ask Fleet Admiral Su-bin. She's the one who'll be fighting them." Back on Earth, Su-bin stood in the command center of the Terran Defense Network, surrounded by holographic displays showing every human ship in space. She was a small woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many wars, but her voice was steady as she addressed the assembled fleet commanders. "As of now, we are on full alert," she said. "The Terran Defense Protocol is active. All ships are to deploy to their assigned positions. Priority 1 is protecting the colony worlds. Priority 2 is protecting Earth itself. Priority 3 is making any attacking force regret their decision." One of the commanders spoke up. "Admiral, we're outnumbered nearly 7 to 1. How are we supposed to hold against that?" "By being smarter, faster, and meaner than they expect," Su-bin replied. "The council species have been fighting the same way for thousands of years. They rely on overwhelming force and superior numbers because that's always worked before. We're going to show them something they've never seen." She pulled up schematics of a ship unlike anything else in human space. It was sleek, almost organic in design, with curves and angles that seemed to shift depending on how you looked at it. "The Horizon-class warship," Su-bin continued. "We have 20 of them, fresh out of the shipyards. They incorporate technology the Council declared theoretically impossible. Quantum displacement drives that let them move in ways traditional ships can't. Weapon systems that operate on principles we discovered during our own conflicts. These ships are our edge. 20 ships against 8,000? Another commander asked skeptically. "No, 20 ships plus 1,200 conventional vessels, plus the most experienced combat pilots in the galaxy," Su-bin corrected. "Remember, we've been fighting each other for centuries. We know things about warfare that these elder species forgot millennia ago. They've been too comfortable, too used to winning through intimidation. We're going to remind the galaxy that humans know how to fight." On the colony world of New Bizen, Governor Haewon addressed a packed assembly hall. The colonists had heard about the Council's demands and humanity's refusal. Now they wanted to know what would happen to them. "I won't lie to you," Haewon said. Her voice amplified across the hall and broadcast to every settlement on the planet. "We're about to face the biggest test in our history. The Council wants us gone. They want these worlds empty. And they're willing to use force to make that happen." The crowd murmured nervously. Haewon raised her hand for quiet. "But here's what they don't understand. We didn't come to these worlds on vacation. We came to build homes. We came to create new lives for ourselves and our children. This isn't just dirt and buildings to us. This is ours. And I'll be damned if we're going to give it up because some ancient aliens say we don't have permission to be here." The murmuring turned to cheers. Haewon smiled. "That said, we need to be realistic. Military forces are coming. Earth's fleet will protect us, but we need to protect ourselves too. I'm calling for volunteers for the Colonial Defense Militia. Anyone over 18 who's willing to learn how to use weapons and defend our settlements. Report to the training centers tomorrow morning. She expected maybe a few thousand volunteers. By the next morning, over 200,000 colonists had signed up, nearly a quarter of the planet's adult population. Similar numbers came in from the other 11 contested worlds. The colonists were not soldiers, but they were determined. Meanwhile, Haiyan Wu received an unexpected communication. It came through encrypted channels, and when he opened it, he found himself looking at a Peltharian diplomat named Kyung Min. Ambassador Haiyan Wu, Kyung Min said quietly, I am taking a great risk contacting you. What I am about to tell you must remain between us. I'm listening. Not all council species support this action against humanity. My people abstained from the vote, as did the Nomians and the Kresh. We cannot openly oppose the council's decision without risking our own positions. But we want you to know that you are not as alone as you might think. That's good to hear, Haiyan Wu said carefully. But what does it mean in practical terms? It means that the council is not as unified as it appears. The Krethians and Valthorians are pushing this conflict because they see humanity as a threat to their dominance. But many smaller species are watching to see what happens. If humanity can stand its ground, if you can prove that the old order isn't invincible, it could change everything. No pressure. Then, Haiyan Wu said with dark humor. Kyung Min's expression was serious. You have done something remarkable. You said no. 23 species before you chose submission. You chose defiance. That matters, even if you don't survive it. Thanks for the vote of confidence. I mean it, Kyung Min insisted. Whatever happens, humanity has already changed the galaxy. You've shown that the council can be challenged. That's worth more than you know. The communication ended, and Haiyan Wu was left with mixed feelings. Moral support was nice, but it wouldn't stop missiles or energy weapons. Still, knowing that some species were watching and hoping gave him something to hold on to. Across human space, preparations intensified. The 12 contested colonies became fortresses, with defensive satellites being deployed in orbit and underground shelters being constructed for civilians. Earth shipyards worked around the clock, churning out missiles, fighters, and support craft. Every available pilot was pulled into training programs for the new combat doctrine Su Bin had developed. On the research station orbiting Mars, G1 worked with a team of scientists on something she called Project Echo. It was based on a simple observation. The council species had been using the same communication protocols for thousands of years. They were efficient and reliable, but they were also predictable. If we can intercept their communications, G1 explained to her team, we can predict their movements. The Horizon ships can use that advantage to stay one step ahead. That's essentially spying on military communications, one researcher pointed out. Yes, G1 agreed. It's also survival. They have the numbers. We need every advantage we can get. The work continued day and night. The Horizon-class ships underwent final trials, their quantum displacement drives being pushed to the limit. The pilots who would fly them practiced maneuvers that would have been impossible in traditional ships, learning to appear in one location and vanish to another in the blink of an eye. Admiral Su Bin watched it all come together and allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism. They were outmatched, outgunned, and facing enemies with millennia of experience. But they had something the Council didn't expect: desperation, innovation, and the kind of stubborn determination that had carried humanity through countless disasters before. 2 weeks after Haiyan Wu's speech to the Council, the Krethian fleet completed its assembly. 800 warships, each one larger than anything humanity had built, each one carrying weapons that could level cities. They began moving toward human space, their destination clear, New Bizan, the largest and most prosperous of the contested colonies. On Earth, President Taeyang addressed the world one final time before the first shots would be fired. "People of Earth, and people of our colonies," she began, her image broadcast to every human settlement across dozens of star systems. "We stand at a crossroads. Behind us is everything we've built, everything we've become. Ahead of us is a fight we didn't want but will not run from." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "The Galactic Council has demanded we surrender our freedom, abandon our homes, and accept their authority over our lives. We have refused, not because we want war, but because freedom is worth fighting for. Because our children deserve to grow up in a galaxy where rights are earned through merit, not granted through age. Because humanity has never bowed to tyrants, and we're not about to start now. In the coming days, we will face forces that outnumber us, outgun us, and have been fighting in space since before our ancestors built the pyramids. They expect us to break. They expect us to run. They expect us to realize our place and submit." Her voice strengthened. "They don't know us very well, do they? To every human in uniform, on every ship, at every station, you carry the hopes of our entire species. Fight well, fight smart, and come home alive. To every colonist on the contested worlds, your courage inspires us all. Stand firm. We will not abandon you. And to the Council, if you're listening, we gave you a chance to talk as equals. You chose threats instead. Now you'll learn what humans do when pushed into a corner. We fight, and we win." The broadcast ended. Across human space, millions held their breath and waited. The Krethian fleet was 3 days from New Bizan. 3 days until humanity would find out if courage and determination could overcome overwhelming odds. In the command center of the Horizon-class ship Dawn's Edge, Commander Young Jae ran final checks on his systems. His ship and 19 others, like it, were positioned in a defensive perimeter around New Bizan. They were the tip of the spear, the first line of defense against the coming storm. "All stations report ready," his tactical officer said. "Good," Young Jae replied. "Let's show them what humans can do." The Krethian fleet emerged from quantum space at the edge of the New Bizan system like a swarm of metal locusts. 800 ships, their hulls gleaming under the light of the system's star, arranged themselves in a formation that had intimidated countless species over thousands of years. At their center, the massive flagship carried the Krethian fleet commander, a warrior who had never known defeat. Commander Young Jae watched them arrive on his tactical display, each red dot representing a ship that outweighed his entire Horizon squadron. Around New Bizan, the colonial defense forces held their positions, waiting for orders that would determine whether they lived or died in the next few hours. The Krethian flagship broadcast on all frequencies, its message translated into perfect English. "Human colony of New Bizan, you are in violation of Galactic Council law. Surrender immediately and prepare for evacuation. You have 1 standard hour to comply. Failure to do so will result in the use of force. This is your only warning." Governor Haewon sat in her command bunker deep beneath the colony's capital city. Around her, military advisors and civilian officials watched the countdown timer begin. 60 minutes until the Krethians would start shooting. She picked up the communicator that connected her to every settlement on the planet. "People of New Bizan," she said calmly. "They're here. They think we'll run. They think one show of force will make us abandon everything we've built. I say we show them what it means to be human. Commander Young Jae, the colony stands with you. Make them regret coming here." Young Jae smiled grimly. Understood, Governor. All ships, this is Dawn's. Edge. Engage defensive pattern Alpha. Let's introduce our guests to human hospitality. The 20 Horizon-class ships vanished from their positions and reappeared, scattered throughout the system. Their quantum displacement drives, moving them in ways that made traditional sensors useless. The Krethian formation rippled with confusion as their targets simply disappeared. The fleet commander aboard the flagship snarled orders. Find them. They cannot hide forever. Sir, we're detecting energy signatures, but they're everywhere at once. Our targeting systems can't lock on. Then fire a spread pattern. Saturate the area. The Krethian fleet opened fire, energy weapons lighting up space with deadly colors. Missiles streaked out in waves, each one carrying enough explosive power to level a city. It was the kind of overwhelming assault that had ended resistance from dozens of species before. But the Horizon ships were already gone, displaced to new positions before the weapons even arrived. And now they struck back. Dawn's Edge appeared directly above a Krethian cruiser, fired a burst of kinetic rounds that punched through the ship's shields like they were paper, then vanished before the surrounding ships could respond. Across the system, 19 other Horizon ships did the same, appearing for seconds at a time to deliver devastating attacks before disappearing again. The Krethian formation began to break. Apart as commanders tried to respond to threats that came from everywhere and nowhere. 3 ships collided in their haste to reposition. 2 more took friendly fire from vessels that fired at where they thought a human ship was, hitting their own allies instead. Young Jai coordinated the attack from his command chair, watching as the tactical display updated in real time. His ship's II predicted Krethian movements and suggested strike points. It was like fighting with eyes in the future, seeing what would happen before it did. Target the flagship, he ordered. All ships converge on my mark. 20 Horizon ships appeared simultaneously around the Krethian flagship, a sphere of human vessels that materialized in perfect synchronization. They fired everything they had, kinetic rounds and energy weapons, and missiles all at once, focused on a single target. The flagship's shields held for exactly 3 seconds before collapsing. The ship didn't explode. It simply came apart, torn into pieces by the concentrated firepower. The Krethian fleet broke. Without their commander, without any way to effectively fight an enemy they couldn't track, they began jumping out of the system. Within 20 minutes of the first shot being fired, over 200 Krethian ships had fled. The remaining vessels tried to maintain formation, but they were scattered and disorganized. Young Jay didn't let up. His squadron continued the assault, picking off isolated ships and driving wedges into the enemy formation. The conventional human fleet, which had been holding back, now joined the fight, overwhelming the confused Krethians with coordinated strikes. 3 hours after arriving with 800 ships, the Krethian fleet limped away with barely 500 intact vessels. They had expected an easy victory against primitive humans. Instead, they had suffered the worst defeat in their military history. On New Bizin, the colonists erupted in celebration. They had stood against the Council's might and survived. More than survived, they had won, but the victory at New Bizin was just the beginning. The Valtharian Empire, watching the Krethian defeat with cold calculation, decided on a different approach. If humans could fight in space, then the Valthorians would simply cut them off from supplies until they had no choice but to surrender. Admiral Su Bin watched the Valtharian fleet deploy around Earth and the core human worlds. Unlike the aggressive Krethian assault, this was a methodical blockade. The Valthorians positioned their ships at key jump points, creating a net that would prevent any supplies from reaching human colonies and any ships from leaving human space. "They're trying to starve us out," she observed, studying the tactical map. "It's actually smarter than what the Krethians tried." How long can we hold? President Taeyang asked from the communication screen. Depends on how tight they keep the blockade. If they're perfect, maybe 3 months before the colonies start running short on critical supplies. 6 months before things get desperate. Then we break the blockade. With what? Su Bin asked. The Horizon ships are effective in combat, but they can't carry cargo. And if we try to force convoys through, the Valthorians will just concentrate their forces and overwhelm us with numbers. Taeyang thought for a moment. What if we don't try to break through? What if we go around? There is no around. They've covered all the jump points. The known jump points, Taeyang corrected. But G1's team has been working on something. New jump calculations that use paths the Council doesn't know about. If we can supply the colonies through routes they're not watching, the blockade becomes meaningless. Su Bin smiled slowly. That's actually brilliant. How soon can we try it? G1 says they need another week to refine the calculations. Jump routes that aren't on any maps are dangerous if you get them wrong. Tell her she has 5 days. The Valthorians are going to figure out we're not panicking, and they'll start probing for weaknesses. I want to hit them before they get comfortable. 5 days later, a human supply convoy entered quantum space using calculations that shouldn't have worked. They emerged not at the blockaded jump points, but in deep space between systems. In areas the Valthorians never thought to guard because standard jump. Drives couldn't reach them. The supplies reached New Bizan and the other colonies without incident. The Valthorian blockade, meticulously planned and executed, was suddenly useless. But Su Bin wasn't content with just bypassing the blockade. She wanted to break it entirely. While the supply convoys used the new routes, she sent the Horizon Squadron on a different mission. Their blockade only works if their supply lines stay intact, she explained to young Ya. During a secured communication. They have hundreds of ships spread across dozens of positions. All of them need fuel, ammunition, food, and parts. Those supplies have to come from somewhere. You want us to hit their logistics? Young Jae said, understanding immediately. Exactly. Find their supply depots, their fuel stations, their ammunition dumps. You don't need to destroy them. Just damage them enough that the Valthorians start running low on resources. The Horizon ships went to work. Using their impossible mobility and the element of surprise, they struck at the Valthorian supply network like surgical instruments. A fuel depot here, an ammunition transport there, a repair station somewhere else. Each target was hit, and the Horizon ships were gone before reinforcements could arrive. Within 2 weeks, the Valthorian blockade began to falter. Ships ran low on fuel and had to leave their positions to resupply. Others exhausted their ammunition reserves and became little more than expensive observation posts. The formation that had seemed so solid began to show gaps. Su Bin pushed conventional forces through those gaps, not to break the blockade, but to harass it, keeping the Valthorians off balance and forcing them to waste more resources responding to human movements. The Valthorian fleet commander, a being of crystalline intelligence who had coordinated successful blockades against 17 different species, found itself facing an enemy that refused to play by established rules. Humans didn't try to force their way through the blockade. They went around it. They didn't attack the blockade itself. They attacked the infrastructure that made it possible. Every conventional tactic failed because the humans kept doing things that weren't supposed to work. After a month of deteriorating conditions, the Valthorian Empire quietly withdrew its fleet from human space. They announced it as a strategic repositioning, but everyone knew the truth. The blockade had failed. Across the galaxy, the Council watched in growing disbelief. The Krethians, one of the most powerful military forces in known space, had been defeated by a species that had been spacefaring for barely 3 decades. The Valthorians, masters of strategic warfare, had been outmaneuvered by human creativity and refusal to follow expected patterns. In the council chambers, Ambassador Haiyan Wu received a message requesting a meeting. It came from Kyungmin, the Pelthurian diplomat who had reached out before. The council is divided, Kyungmin told him when they met in a neutral location. The old powers, the Krethians and Valthorians, want to escalate. They're calling for a combined assault, throwing everything they have at humanity to prove that the council cannot be defied. And the others? Haiyan Wu asked. Many are questioning whether this fight is worth the cost. Your victories have been impressive, but more than that, they've been inspirational. 3 species have already petitioned to have ancient agreements reviewed. If the council grants those petitions, it opens the door for others to question their own subordination. So we've created a political crisis. You've created an opportunity, Kyungmin corrected. The Nomian Assembly and the Kresh Commonwealth are preparing to put forward a proposal. A complete restructuring of council membership rules. Species would be bound only by laws they helped create. No more retroactive authority. The Krethians will never accept that. They won't have a choice if enough species support it. That's why this moment matters so much. If humanity can hold long enough for the politics to shift, you might win this without destroying half the galaxy. Haiyan Wu nodded slowly. Then we keep fighting. We keep surviving. And we hope the galaxy wakes up before too much blood is spilled. On New Bizin, Governor Haewon looked up at the night sky, where human ships patrolled against any further attacks. The colonists had returned to their normal lives as much as possible, farming and building and living, despite the threat hanging over them. Her communicator chirped. It was a message from Earth, from President Taeyang herself. The line holds. It reads simply, "Keep standing. A galaxy is watching." Haewon smiled and sent back a single word, always. 3 months after humanity's refusal, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The chamber that had once been unified in its demand for human compliance was now fractured by competing interests and bitter arguments. The Krethian delegation demanded total war against the human species, while the Valthorians counseled strategic withdrawal. Between them, dozens of smaller species argued for positions, ranging from complete capitulation to humanity's demands to outright genocide. The Peltharian representative, Kyungmin, stood to address the assembly. His voice was soft, but carried through the chamber with unexpected force. For 10,000 years, this council has maintained order through a simple principle: the old rule the young. The established dictate to the newcomers. The powerful command the weak. We told ourselves this was necessary for peace, yet without strict hierarchy, the galaxy would descend into chaos. He paused, looking around at the assembled delegates. But what we created was not peace. It was compliance through fear. And now, for the first time, a species has looked at our system and said no. Not because they are irrational or savage, but because they recognize tyranny when they see it. The Krethian magistrate rose angrily. You speak of tyranny? We speak of law. We speak of order. Without the Council's authority, every species would expand without limit, taking whatever they wanted, fighting for every resource. Like humanity took 12 uninhabited worlds and turned them into homes? Kyungmin asked quietly. Tell me, Magistrate, what harm did those colonies cause? What council members suffered from their existence? The law was broken. A law humanity never agreed to. A law created before they existed. You demand they follow rules they had no part in making, and when they refuse, you call them criminals. Kyungmin's voice strengthened. But let me ask this assembly, how many of you are bound by laws you never voted on? How many of you follow rules that were imposed on your species by threat of force? The chamber fell silent. Dozens of delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The magistrate's 4 eyes narrowed dangerously. "You speak treason, Heltharian." "I speak truth," young men replied. "And I am not alone." As if on cue, the Nomian ambassador stood, followed by the Kresh representative. Then others began to rise, one by one. Within minutes, over a third of the council's members were standing, a silent statement of support. "We propose a restructuring of council membership," the Nomian ambassador announced. "No species shall be bound by laws created before they achieved spaceflight. All species shall have representation in creating laws that govern them. The council shall operate on consent, not coercion." "Impossible," the Valtharian commander said, its crystalline voice ringing through the chamber. "The council has operated under current rules for millennia. You cannot simply overturn all precedent because one species refuses to accept their proper place. Can't we?" The Kresh representative spoke up. "Or is it that you fear what happens when younger species are treated as equals? When you can't use ancient laws to control them?" The debate raged for hours. The old powers argued that changing the system would lead to chaos. The reformers argued that maintaining it would lead to endless conflict. Through it all, humanity's name was invoked again and again, both as a warning and as inspiration. Finally, a vote was called. Not on the formal proposal, but on a simple question. Should the council negotiate with humanity as equals, or should the conflict continue until humanity was forced to submit? The vote was close. 217 species voted to continue the conflict. 243 voted to negotiate. The council was no longer unified, and everyone knew it. Meanwhile, in human space, a different crisis was developing. The Krethian Dominion, humiliated by their defeat at New Bizan and enraged by the council's vote to negotiate, decided to take matters into their own hands. If the council wouldn't force humanity to submit, the Krethians would do it alone. They assembled the largest attack fleet in their history. Over 1,500 ships, pulled from every corner of Krethian space, all with a single destination, Earth itself. They would bypass the colonies, strike at humanity's heart, and end this rebellion once and for all. Admiral Subin watched the Krethian fleet gather and felt cold certainty settle over her. This was the real test. Everything before had been preliminary skirmishes. This was total war. "They're coming straight at us," she told President Taeyang. "No subtlety, no tactics, just overwhelming force aimed directly at Earth. Can we stop them?" Su Bin was quiet for a moment. "If we had more time, maybe. But they'll be here in 4 days, and we can't evacuate 8 billion people in 4 days. So yes, we stop them. Because there's no alternative." She activated the general recall, bringing every human ship from across the colonies back to Earth's solar system. The Horizon Squadron, the conventional fleet. Every destroyer and cruiser and fighter humanity possessed. All converging on one place for one last stand. Commander Young Jay brought Dawn's Edge into formation alongside the rest of the Horizon ships. Around them, the assembled human fleet looked pitifully small compared to what was coming. Just over 1,000 ships against 1,500 Krethian warships, each one built by a species that had been perfecting space warfare for 12,000 years. "Not great odds," his tactical officer observed. "No," Young Jay agreed. "But we don't need great odds. We just need to hold long enough." Long enough for what? For the Krethians to realize they can't win without destroying themselves in the process. The Krethian fleet arrived in Earth's solar system like an avalanche. Their formation was different this time, tighter and more disciplined. They had learned from their defeat at New Bizan, adapting their tactics to counter the Horizon ships. Mobility advantaged that the battle began at the orbit of Mars. The Krethians pushed forward in waves, each one designed to draw out the Horizon ships and pinned them down with overwhelming firepower. It was brutal, methodical, and terrifyingly effective. Youngjae's squadron danced between the waves, striking and retreating, trying to find weaknesses in the formation. But the Krethians had learned their lesson. They maintained tight formations, covering each other's blind spots, refusing to be drawn into the kind of scattered fighting that had doomed them before. The conventional human fleet engaged at close range, trading shots with Krethian cruisers in a slugging match that neither side could afford to lose. Ships on both sides began falling, bright explosions marking where vessels had been moments before Su-bin coordinated the defense from her flagship, watching the tactical display and making decisions that would determine who lived and died. She pulled damaged ships out of the line, rotated fresh vessels into critical positions, and constantly adjusted her strategy to counter Krethian movements. But the numbers were grinding them down. For every Krethian ship destroyed, humanity lost one of its own. And the Krethians had 500 more ships than humanity did. And something unexpected happened. A new fleet emerged from quantum space, positioning itself between the Krethian forces and Earth. At first, Su-bin thought they were reinforcements for the enemy. Then she saw the ship designs and felt her heart skip. Peltharian vessels, Nomian warships, Kresh battle cruisers. 3 species, bringing nearly 400 ships combined, all positioned to defend Earth. Kyung-min's voice came over the general communication channel. The Peltharian Collective stands with humanity. We will not allow the Krethians to destroy a species for the crime of seeking freedom. The Nomian commander echoed the statement. The age of domination through ancient law is over. Today, we choose a new path. The Krethian fleet commander tried to adapt to the sudden change in odds, but the arrival of reinforcements had shattered their careful planning. The tight formations began to break apart as Krethian ships tried to reposition for the new threat. Youngjae saw the opening and took it. The Horizon Squadron struck at the gaps in the formation, tearing into the Krethian fleet from multiple angles. The Peltharian and Nomian forces pushed from the flanks, while the Kresh vessels hammered the center. The Battle of Terra lasted 6 hours. It was the largest space engagement in galactic history, with over 2,500 ships involved. When it finally ended, the Krethian fleet was shattered. Less than 300 of their ships managed to escape, fleeing back to their own space in disarray. The rest were destroyed or captured, but the cost was heavy. Humanity had lost over 400 ships. The allied species that had come to their aid had suffered similar losses. Wreckage floated throughout Earth's solar system, a graveyard of vessels and crew from a dozen different species. On Earth, people watched the battle through broadcasts and held their breath as human ships fell one by one. When the Krethians finally retreated, the entire planet erupted in celebration, mixed with grief. They had survived, but at terrible cost. In the council chambers, the Krethian magistrate stood alone, its delegation having abandoned it. The other species stared at the being that had pushed for war and lost everything. The Krethian Dominion formally withdraws from the conflict, the magistrate said, its voice hollow. We accept negotiation with the Terran species. The Valtharian commander stood as well. The Valtharian Empire also withdraws. We acknowledge that the previous approach was unsuccessful. One by one, the remaining species that had opposed humanity announced their withdrawal from the conflict. The war was over, but more than that, the old order had collapsed. Haiyan-Wu stood before the council once more, but this time as an equal. President Tae-Yang had appointed him as Earth's first permanent representative, and the council had voted to accept humanity as a full member with veto power. The proposal for restructuring is now open for final vote, the Peltharian speaker announced. It was Kyung-min, elected to lead the reform coalition. All in favor of establishing new membership rules based on consent rather than imposition? The vote was overwhelming. Only 30 species opposed it, mostly the oldest and most traditional. Everyone else voted yes, eager to embrace a system that treated them as equals rather than subjects. The reforms passed, and with them came a flood of petitions. 23 species that had been forced into subordination decades or centuries ago now demanded review of the agreements that bound them. The Council, no longer able to simply impose its will through threats, had to actually negotiate. 6 months after the Battle of Terra, Haiyan Wu stood in his council office and looked out at the station that represented the galactic community. It looked the same, but everything about it had changed. Species that had barely spoken now formed coalitions. Debates were fierce but honest. And for the first time in millennia, the Council operated on genuine consent rather than coerced compliance. G1 had joined him on the station, establishing a collaborative research center where scientists from 15 different species worked together as equals. The breakthroughs were already remarkable. Technology that the old Council had hoarded was now being shared. Problems that had seemed unsolvable were being tackled by diverse teams, bringing different perspectives. Day Haiyan was back on Earth, training the first joint species military academy. Pilots and soldiers from dozens of worlds learned together, forming bonds that would make future conflicts less likely. The Horizon-class technology, once humanity's secret weapon, was now being adapted and improved by engineers from other species. Governor Hei-1 continued leading New Bizan, which had become a symbol of resistance throughout the galaxy. Young species sent delegations to see the world that had stood against the Council and survived. The colonists welcomed them all, sharing their story and their hope. Admiral Subin, now semi-retired, spent her time writing a comprehensive history of human military tactics. It was being studied by strategists across the galaxy. Species that had fought the same way for thousands of years, now learning new approaches from the upstart. Humans. President Tae Yang addressed the Galactic Council for the first time. Invited to speak about humanity's journey from isolated world to council member, she spoke of struggle and determination, of refusing to accept unjust authority, and of the belief that all sapient species deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. When she finished, the chamber erupted in applause. Not polite acknowledgement, but genuine celebration. The galaxy had changed, and everyone knew it. In the council chambers, when a Valtharian delegate tried to invoke an ancient tradition that would require newer species to defer to elder ones in voting procedures, Haiyan Wu simply smiled and pressed his voting button. The word "denied" flashed on the main display. Next order of business? He asked calmly. Around the chamber, dozens of species who had once lived under the thumb of ancient laws smiled with him. The age of demanded compliance had ended. The age of earned respect had begun. And it had started with a simple refusal, spoken by a species that understood one fundamental truth: freedom is not granted by those in power. It is claimed by those brave enough to stand for it. Humanity had refused to kneel. In doing so, they had not just freed themselves, but had inspired an entire galaxy to stand tall. The old order was gone, and in its place was something new, something better. A galaxy where species were judged by their actions, not their age. Where law required consent, not just force. Where every civilization, young or old, had an equal voice in shaping their collective future. And Earth, the small blue world that had dared to say no, now stood as a symbol of what courage and determination could achieve. The humans had come to the stars, hoping to find fellowship. Instead, they had found hierarchy and demanded better. Now, finally, they had the fellowship they had always sought. Not as subjects, but as equals. The galaxy would never be the same. And that, everyone agreed, was exactly as it should be.